I used to believe some secrets were best left buried. Turns out, the grave can't hold everything. My name is Rachel, or rather, was. I died 2 weeks before my daughter's 21st birthday. They said it was peaceful, a sudden heart condition, no pain, just quiet. But what followed, was anything but peaceful for those I left behind. At my funeral, the air was thick with grief. My daughter, Ava, sat in the front row, her hands clenched around a crumpled tissue, her face pale and broken. She wore the navy blue dress I once told her made her look powerful, ironic, considering how powerless she felt in that moment. Ava was my everything. My only child. My miracle after years of thinking I'd never become a mother. She was the reason I fought through failed relationships, long work shifts, and lonely nights. She never knew just how many sacrifices were made for her. She never knew the full truth. Not until that day. As the final words of the eulogy drifted into silence, a tall man stepped into the back of the chapel, unnoticed at first. He was older now, hair grayer than I remembered, his posture weighed by years of what I can only imagine was regret. His name was Ethan. And he was Ava's real father. No one knew him. Not my friends. Not my sister, Melanie, who sat beside Ava, gently rubbing her back. Not even Ava herself. She had grown up believing that David, my late husband, was her father. And in every visible way, he was. He raised her. He taught her how to ride a bike. He packed her school lunches with embarrassing notes. He was there for every scraped knee and heartbreak. But David died in a car accident when Ava was just 10. The truth was, David loved Ava as his own, even though he knew she wasn't biologically his. And I never told her otherwise. I told myself I was protecting her, protecting his memory. Ethan, on the other hand, he had disappeared before I even knew I was pregnant. And then, all these years later, he showed up at my funeral. It wasn't a coincidence. A letter I had written, sealed and stored in the back of my dresser, had finally been mailed after my death, as instructed. It contained the truth. The whole truth. About Ethan. About Ava. About a love I tried to forget. About a mistake I tried to erase. And now, it was all unraveling, with my body barely cold. Ava stood frozen at the graveside, eyes wide as the stranger stepped closer. He didn't say much. Just offered a gentle, sorrowful look, and a folded envelope with her name on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was my handwriting. Inside was everything I never had the courage to say while I was alive. And what she read would forever change how she saw me, and herself. Ava's voice broke as she whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Ethan looked at her with red eyes, but before he could speak, Melanie grabbed Ava's arm. "Don't," she said, her tone sharp. "You don't know who this man is." Ava stared at Ethan. "I don't know who any of you are anymore." And with that, she turned and walked away, the letter still clutched in her hand, the wind catching her tears mid-fall. The past had finally caught up. But would Ava be able to forgive the dead? Ava hadn't slept in 2 nights. The letter from her mother sat folded on her nightstand, creased and slightly smudged from the tears she'd cried while reading it over and over. It felt unreal, like her entire life had been a beautiful painting that someone had ripped in half to reveal a different image underneath. David, the man who tucked her into bed, who cheered at her high school graduation, who whispered that she'd always be his little girl, wasn't her biological father. And the man who stood silently at her mother's funeral, with tired eyes and trembling hands, was Ethan. Ava hated how that name felt foreign and familiar at the same time. She found herself pacing the hallway of her small apartment, trying to remember if she'd ever seen him before, maybe in a photo, maybe in a crowd. Her mother had hidden it well. No clues. No passing comments. Not even during the vulnerable moments after David's death. Just silence. And now, this. The letter had been brief but loaded with pain. Rachel had admitted that Ethan was a part of her past she never wanted to revisit. They were young, reckless. Their relationship was passionate but flawed. When she discovered she was pregnant, Ethan had already disappeared, too consumed by his own demons to face responsibility. So Rachel moved forward. She built a life with David, who loved her and loved Ava without conditions. She thought burying the past would protect her daughter. But the truth didn't stay buried. Especially not when the man who vanished returned, drawn by the weight of the letter he finally received too late. Ava kept hearing Melanie's voice echo in her head, "You don't know who he is." Her aunt was fiercely protective. She had always been her mother's keeper, especially during the years when Rachel struggled to keep everything together after David's death. Melanie had seen Ava's mother through depression, job losses, and late-night breakdowns. She knew things Ava didn't. And that made Ava wonder, how much did Melanie know about Ethan? She decided to confront her. Melanie stood by the kitchen sink, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. "He shouldn't have come," she muttered without looking at Ava. "Why not?" Ava asked. "Don't I have the right to know who he is?" Melanie turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Because he broke your mother, Ava. She gave him everything, and he left. She cried herself to sleep for weeks after he vanished. And when you came along, she promised herself she'd never look back. Did you know he was my biological father?" There was a long pause before Melanie nodded. Ava's breath caught. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me?" "Because Rachel didn't want you to think your life was built on lies. She didn't want you to feel like a mistake." Ava sat down at the table, suddenly drained. "I don't know what I feel anymore." Melanie softened, sitting across from her. "I get that. I really do. But I need you to be careful. Ethan didn't just disappear. He had problems. Drinking. Anger. And your mom, she spent years afraid he'd come back." Ava stared at the table. But he did come back. That night, she couldn't sleep again. Instead, she pulled out her phone, stared at the number on the back of the letter Ethan had left for her. It had only 2 words written below it, "If you ever want to talk." She didn't know what she wanted. But she needed answers, answers her mother took to the grave, and that Melanie couldn't, or wouldn't, give. Her fingers hovered. Then, slowly, she tapped the number. It rang once. Twice. "Hello." His voice was older, softer than she imagined. Ava hesitated. "It's me. Ava." A pause. Then a shaky breath. "You sound just like your mother." Silence filled the line for a few seconds. Then Ava said, "Why did you leave?" And Ethan, who had waited 21 years to hear her voice, whispered, "Because I was a coward." The next morning, Ava stared at her reflection in the mirror, expecting to see someone different. But the same eyes looked back. Her mother's eyes. The same ones that always crinkled at the corners when she laughed too hard or smiled with pride at school ceremonies. Now, all Ava could see in them was confusion, and fear. The call with Ethan lingered in her mind. It hadn't lasted more than 10 minutes, yet each word replayed in her head like a haunting melody. He hadn't begged for forgiveness. He hadn't asked to meet. But there was something in his voice, a brokenness, that made her ache. Still, she didn't trust it. Not yet. So she did what anyone in her place might do, she searched. Through Facebook, old news clippings, and digital archives. And slowly, she started piecing together a version of Ethan her mother had never spoken of. He'd been in and out of rehab. Arrested once in his 20s for public intoxication. No record of violence, but rumors of instability. He'd worked odd jobs across the state, kept to himself. One forum thread mentioned a bar fight. Another listed him as a volunteer at a recovery center. A walking contradiction. As Ava dug deeper, another name kept popping up, Daniel. She clicked the link, and an old photo loaded, two young men with guitars slung over their shoulders, sitting on a porch step. Ethan, and David. Her stomach dropped. David, her dad, had known Ethan. They weren't strangers. They were friends. A sick feeling bloomed in her chest. Her life was no longer a puzzle with one missing piece, now it was an entire box of mismatched fragments. Why didn't anyone tell her? Why would her mother hide that David and Ethan had once shared a past? She stormed into the living room, confronting Melanie, who was sipping coffee, watching the morning news. "You didn't tell me Ethan and David were friends," Ava said. Melanie's eyes widened for a second. "How did you?" "So it's true." Melanie sighed, lowering her mug. They were roommates in college. Bandmates, actually. Ethan was the one who introduced Rachel to David. The ground shifted beneath Ava. So, he knew. David knew Ethan might be my real father. Melanie nodded slowly. Rachel didn't tell him at first. She wasn't sure. But when you were about 2, she confessed everything. Ava collapsed into a chair, heart pounding. And he still raised me like I was his own. Yes. Because to him, you were his. He didn't care what biology said. He loved your mother. He loved you. And he asked us, begged us, not to ever tell you. He wanted you to feel safe. Whole. Ava felt like she was underwater. Each truth pulled her deeper. But why didn't Mom just tell me when I got older? Why wait until her funeral to leave a letter? She was scared. Scared that if you knew, it would shatter everything she built. She never stopped loving David. And she hated herself for lying. That letter was her apology. Ava's hands trembled in her lap. "I want to meet him," she whispered. Melanie froze. "Are you sure?" "I need to. I can't live in this shadow anymore. I need answers, from him." That evening, Ava sent Ethan a message. "I want to meet. Tomorrow." He responded with a simple location, a park bench by the lake where her mother used to take her as a child. The next day was overcast, the sky painted in grays and pale blues. Ava approached slowly, her heart thudding in her ears. Ethan sat on the bench, older than she imagined, wearing a navy jacket and faded jeans. He looked up and stood when he saw her. For a moment, neither spoke. "You look just like Rachel," he said softly. Ava studied his face. The resemblance was faint, but there, in the jawline, the arch of his brows. "You knew David," she said. "You knew all along." Ethan's expression crumbled. "I tried to walk away. I thought it was the right thing. But I watched from afar. I saw you grow up. I came to your school play once, sat in the back. I never stopped caring. I just didn't think I deserved to be in your life." Ava didn't respond immediately. "Then why now?" she finally asked. "Because your mother's letter, it told me that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running." The wind picked up around them as Ava stood silently by the lake, the weight of two lives, one lived, one hidden, bearing down on her chest. "I came to your school play once," Ethan's voice echoed in her head as she sat in her car afterward, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor her to reality. She had just met her biological father. And he remembered the school play. The one where she played Juliet with trembling hands and a nervous heart. The one she thought her mother was late for, and David, he'd come straight from a 12-hour shift just to sit in the front row with flowers. He'd always been there. And now? He was gone. Buried. And she was left in this impossible space between past and truth. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. Every breath felt heavy. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "I don't want to replace what you had. I just want to know you, if you'll let me." She stared at it for several minutes. Then, she did something she never expected. She messaged her Aunt Melanie. "Did you know Ethan came to my school play?" Melanie responded almost immediately. "Yes. Your mom told me." He stood in the back, didn't even let Rachel know. "He said just watching you on stage was enough." That broke something inside Ava. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. The next morning, she met Melanie at the cemetery. The grave was covered in fresh lilies. Someone else had been there. "Was it you?" Ava asked. Melanie shook her head slowly. "No. I think Ethan came earlier." Ava didn't know how to feel about that. Was it too much? Too soon? Too late? "I don't know what to do," Ava whispered, kneeling beside the headstone. "He's been watching me from afar. And all this time I thought I knew what family meant. I thought truth was simple." Melanie placed a hand on her shoulder. "Love was never simple for your mother. She loved both men. In different ways. But David was the one who chose to stay." Ava looked up, eyes glistening. "And Ethan?" "He chose to disappear. Until now." Later that week, Ava invited Ethan to her apartment. He arrived with a box in his arms. "These are old letters," he said, "ones I wrote but never sent. And a few photos. From college, and from when I saw you from a distance." Ava opened the box. A letter dated 2008, her fourth grade graduation. Another from 2015, her senior year. Her hands trembled. "You were really there," she whispered. "I never stopped being your father in my heart," Ethan said, voice tight. "But I was a coward. I let my shame keep me away." Ava stared at him. "So why now?" "Because grief stripped away everything else. When I heard Rachel was gone, it woke something in me. I didn't want you to grow up thinking no one else cared. Tears filled her eyes. But David did care. More than anything. He gave everything for me. And now he's not here, and you are. Ethan's voice cracked. Then let me help carry what's left. That night, Ava read every letter. Every unsent thought. Every memory frozen in ink. And by the end, something shifted inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But space. Space to breathe. Space to wonder what could still be built, if not a new version of Dad, then maybe something else. Ava thought the hardest part was over, sifting through old letters, facing the man she never knew she had, grieving the father who raised her. But just as her world had started to settle into a fragile balance, a knock shattered the quiet calm she'd been trying to rebuild. It was a Sunday morning when the doorbell rang. She opened it expecting groceries, maybe Melanie, but it wasn't either. A woman stood there. Mid-40s, neatly dressed, with sharp eyes and a folded envelope in her hand. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," she said. "My name is Lydia, and I'm Ethan's wife." Ava's world spun. Wife? Lydia stepped inside hesitantly, glancing around the apartment like it was sacred ground she wasn't sure she belonged in. "Yes. We've been married for over 20 years. We have 2 children. I only just found out about you." Ava stared, mouth slightly open. He never told me he was married." Lydia let out a bitter laugh. "He never told me he had a daughter." Ava stepped back, clutching the armrest of the couch for support. Lydia handed her the envelope. "He wrote this letter after he came back from seeing you. I found it last night. I thought you should read it." With trembling hands, Ava opened the letter. It was dated 2 days ago. In it, Ethan confessed everything, not just about her, but about the marriage he had broken long ago. He had known Rachel was pregnant when he left, but he also knew he was already engaged to Lydia. He'd lived a double life briefly, before choosing one path and abandoning the other. Ava felt her throat close up. "I didn't come to fight," Lydia said gently. "But I thought you should know the truth. You weren't just the daughter he gave up. You were the secret he built his life around." The weight of betrayal hit her all over again. Just when she had begun to believe in Ethan's version of fatherhood, the illusion cracked. That evening, Ava met Ethan at the same lakeside bench they'd once shared in silence. She didn't speak right away. Just handed him the letter. He read it, his face slowly falling into quiet devastation. "I didn't know she'd come to you," he finally said. Ava's voice was cold. "And I didn't know you had a wife. Or children." He closed his eyes. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. I should have told you the truth." "You should have told someone the truth," she snapped. "Instead, you showed up at my dad's funeral and tried to become something you were never brave enough to be." "I wanted to be part of your life," he whispered. "You were part of it," she replied bitterly. "Just in the shadows. Hiding. Pretending." There was a long silence. Then Ava looked him in the eyes. "You don't get to rewrite history because you feel guilty now." "I'm not asking to replace David," Ethan said, tears forming. "I'm asking for a second chance to be honest. Even if it means starting from zero." Ava stood. "I don't know what you are to me anymore. But I know what David was. He was enough." And I'm done letting ghosts rewrite his story. And with that, she walked away. Ava didn't sleep that night. The words from Ethan's letter, "You were the life I left behind but never forgot," kept circling in her head like a haunting lullaby. Her fingers still trembled whenever she touched the paper. But it wasn't the letter that haunted her most, it was the idea that she had spent her entire life loving a man who raised her, while the man who helped create her had simply vanished, hidden behind a life of silence. By morning, her heart felt bruised. But something inside her also felt steadier, like a wound finally exposed to air. She sat in her kitchen, staring blankly at her cup of tea, when Melanie entered with her phone. "You need to see this," her best friend whispered. It was a post. Lydia, the wife, had written a long message, shared publicly on her social media. It read, "I didn't know my husband had a daughter until after his funeral. And now I know why he never told me. Because she's extraordinary, and meeting her would have shattered every lie he'd ever built. I'm sorry for the part one unknowingly played in the silence." The post had gone viral. Suddenly, the shame Ava thought she'd have to carry forever, was being seen by the world for what it was, not hers. She wasn't the secret. She was the one hidden from. Later that day, Ava drove back to the cemetery. She hadn't visited since the funeral, hadn't wanted to. But now, as the wind rustled through the trees and the late afternoon sun spilled over the marble headstones, she needed to face one more truth. She knelt beside the gravestone, David Michael Rhodes, loving husband and father. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from confusion, but clarity. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "I thought for a while that you weren't mine. But I know now, you were always mine. Even if my DNA says otherwise." She placed the letter Ethan had written beside the flowers. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like peace. Back at home, she found an envelope slipped under her door. No name. No markings. Just a small note tucked inside. "He came to see me, you know. Before he passed. He said he wanted to put everything right. But I told him, some things can't be rewritten. Only remembered." It was signed by Rachel, her mother's best friend. A woman she hadn't seen in years. Another thread. Another truth. Ava's world, once tangled and tight, had begun to loosen. Not perfectly, but enough. The next morning, Ava stood before her mirror. She was scheduled to speak at a local community grief support event, something she used to attend silently. Now, she'd been asked to share her story. She adjusted her scarf, swallowed back nerves, and whispered to her reflection, "You are not the mistake. You're the miracle." In the weeks that followed the funeral, Ava found herself walking through a new world, one shaped not by anger or confusion, but by quiet acceptance. She no longer searched for answers in old letters or rewatched childhood memories hoping for signs. She had learned the most painful truth: sometimes, love and betrayal coexist within the same heartbeat. And sometimes, being left out of someone's truth doesn't mean you weren't loved, it just means they weren't brave enough to include you in it. Ava had returned to her normal life, but nothing about her truly felt normal anymore. At work, she noticed things more deeply: how her coworkers held tension behind their smiles, how everyone carried untold stories. At home, she slowly started boxing up her father's things. Not as an act of closure, but one of transformation. She kept the watch he always wore, the one he never let her touch as a child. She wore it now, proudly. Not because it told time, but because it reminded her who raised her with kindness, even if not with full honesty. One morning, she received a letter from Lydia, the wife of her biological father. "I saw your talk at the grief event. You're brave, Ava. Braver than any of us were. I hope one day, we can meet properly. My daughter would like to know you too." Ava stared at the letter, her hand trembling just slightly. She folded it slowly, tucked it into a journal, and smiled. Not everything needs to be rushed. Some bridges build themselves when we stop burning the ones behind us. The final turning point, later that month, Ava returned to the cemetery for a small memorial she arranged. She invited no one, except Melanie, her best friend, and Rachel, her mother's old friend who had written her that note. They stood in silence as Ava placed a framed photo between the gravestones, one of her with both men in her life, David, the man who raised her, and Ethan, whose eyes stared back at her every time she looked in the mirror. She whispered, "I forgive you." And she meant it. A full circle moment. 2 months later, Ava opened her front door to a teenage girl holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "I'm Emma," the girl said shyly. "My mom said I could meet you if I wanted." Ava stepped aside, voice soft. "Come in. I'll make tea." In the background, her father's watch ticked slowly. Life, despite everything, was still moving forward. And so was she.